I've been dating my girlfriend for about 2.5 years. She's a small blonde with a positive attitude about everything. We both go to college, so we only get to see each other every so often. Her college is in New Hampshire, and mine is in Massachusetts. Since she doesn't have a car, I'll drive up to see her in my old little red car that I got from my grandmother. I'm not a huge fan of the car, but I got it basically free, so I can't complain. I never had an issue making this 1.5-hour drive, but a few weeks ago I got more than my fill. I was visiting my girlfriend, and it already was becoming a rough day. We wanted the dorm room to ourselves, but her bitchy roommate wouldn't leave, so we hung out in the common room. After spending most of the day together, we finally called it time for me to head back to my own college. I said goodbye, and that I would text her when I got back. It was 6 o'clock anyways, and it was getting pretty dark outside, given that it was winter. I normally take the New Hampshire back roads for a more scenic route, and also to avoid traffic. It doesn't affect the time of traveling at all either, so that's a plus. Most people who live in or visit New Hampshire know that most of the back roads are not lit well, with streetlights, or not even lit at all. This isn't too much of a problem because I can just put on my high beams. About 30 minutes of driving, I turned down a road that looked as if it was just a wide path. The GPS said I would be going straight for about 7 miles. And due to knowing about the way New Hampshire roads can be, I didn't want anything of it. The street was like how I mentioned before. It was narrow enough for a car and a half, and it was surrounded by woods, with no streetlights whatsoever. I got about 3 or 4 miles in and saw a guy in my high beams, standing in the middle of the road. He was waving down my car asking for help. The road wasn't big enough for me to pass around him, so I had to stop. The man then came around to my driver's side window and gestured for me to put it down. I wasn't thinking straight, so I rolled my window down about halfway. He looked like an average 40 to 45-year-old man, but he gave off a disturbing presence. He told me he was having car troubles and asked me to get out of my car and help him. Now, I'm a 19-year-old and have an average build with brown surfer-styled hair. None of my physical qualities hint to me knowing anything about cars. I then told him that I knew nothing about cars and that if he really needed help, that I could call him a mechanic or a tow truck. He kept gesturing to his black rusted pickup truck and insisted that I got out to help him. This started to give me the chills, and I didn't know what to do. That is when I noticed there was someone crouching behind the truck. The man couldn't tell, but I began to internally panic. My fight or flight senses kicked into gear, and I chose to try something risky. I then told the guy that I would pull over on the side of the road up ahead and get out to see what I can help him with. This seemed to work, and the guy began to smile. He backed off of my car, and I stepped as hard as I could on my gas pedal. I sped off and looked in my rear view mirror to see both men run out into the middle of the road and just stand there. I kept driving as fast as I could until I got off the road to a nearby gas station, where I stopped to call the police. I told the dispatch my experience and asked then if I needed to stick around for questioning. They told me they would send some officers out to check the street, and I was fine to continue on driving. I then called my girlfriend and told her what happened. She was just happy that I was safe and sound. I have no idea what that man's intentions were. I don't know if the men were actually having car troubles, or if I was going to get carjacked, or much worse. Needless to say, after that night, I will not be driving on the back roads alone at night, ever again. I'm from the Northeast Pennsylvania area, where nothing too exciting ever happens. When I was in high school, more specifically 11th grade, in 2014, there was a man who shot 2 police officers and killed one. After he did this, there was a search for him all around Pennsylvania and the states around. He was on America's Most Wanted. I'm sure if you do more research, you can find his name. Police around our area were sure he was in the woods somewhere, so they made it clear for everyone not to be out too late and to lock your doors at night. One night, my friend and I were driving around our area late at night, especially because, like I said, there's nothing to do in our area. We got to a main road and my friend starts to slow down. I was on my phone scrolling through my music playlist to pick what song to play next. I looked over to her when she slowed down and noticed she was on her phone. Since it was late at night, there was not a single person on the road, so she decided to go about 5 miles per hour and answer a call really quick. We continued going slowly and on our phones until something told us both to look up. At the same time, we look up and we see a man in all black from head to toe, walking on the yellow lines in the middle of the road. We didn't think anything of it really until he walked towards our car, fast enough to catch up. We sat in silence until the man, who just looked like a black figure, reached for my friend's driver's door handle. We both screamed at the top of our lungs. My friend pressed down on the gas, and we didn't slow down or stop until we reached the next town. A couple of weeks later, the wanted man was found right in that area. We don't know if it was him, but we have an idea it could have been.
Francine gripped the sides of the tub as best she could and pulled herself up into a sitting position. She spat and sputtered as the water splashed down all around her. Giggling, she swiped her dripping hair away from her eyes and gave them a rub. Dunking her head under the water had always been her favorite part of bath time. As she surveyed the bathroom, she noticed that something had changed. Her mother wasn't there. Weird, she thought. She was here when I dunked my head under. Maybe the phone rang? Francine stood up carefully and grabbed the towel that hung on the rack nearby. She hastily dried and wrapped herself and headed for the bathroom door. When she opened it, a chill invaded the room and struck her to the bone. She had had enough baths to know that the air always felt cold against wet skin, but this was more than cold. It seemed icy. "Mom?" she called. There was no answer. All was silent. Francine began to worry. Usually she could hear her mother talking if she were on the phone. Even with just the two of them living there, the house was almost never so quiet. Slowly, Francine stepped into the hallway. She called again. "Mom?" Again, no answer came. By now, she had reached the kitchen door. She rounded the corner and stepped into the room, and terror seized her little body. There, sitting in her favorite chair, was Francine's mother. She was slumped over onto the table with her head on her arms and her face hidden. Beneath her on the table was a growing pool of red, which had begun to drip over the edge and onto the floor. Francine screamed. Hot tears blurred her vision. She yelled for her mother to rise or show some sign of life, but nothing came. She searched her child mind for what to do. at last remembering the number she'd been told to call in case of emergencies. This was an emergency if she'd ever seen one, so she turned and grabbed the home phone off the wall. As she pressed it to her ear, her problems only grew. Not so much as a dial tone could be heard. She tried frantically to push the buttons, but nothing ever went through. Frustrated, she let the phone fall to the floor and whipped back around to face her mother. The sight that met her eyes only filled her with more confusion and terror. Her mother was gone, and in her place were 3 men. They were dressed from head to toe in what looked like some kind of white spacesuit. One was spraying some kind of liquid on the floor while the other 2 had begun to move the table. Francine screamed, but none of the men seemed to notice. Who were they? How had they gotten past her? And what had they done with her mother? She was hurt and she needed help. Feeling as if a flame had been lit beneath her, Francine ran. It was instinct more than reason that guided her out of the room and down the hall to the front door. There she gripped the handle and twisted and pulled, all to no avail. The door simply would not open. She tried turning the knob this way and that. She pushed, she pulled, she kicked and screamed until at last, defeated and sobbing, she pressed her back up against the hardwood and slid down into a pile on the floor. It was only then that she could see the hallway behind her. Again, everything had changed, but even more dramatically now than before. The place looked absolutely ruined. The house was dark, but there was just enough light given by the street lamp outside, allowing her to see the trash that lined the floor. The walls were covered with spray-painted faces, symbols, and curse words. Francine was stunned into silence. Only her own panting breaths filled the darkened space. This was not the house she'd been in only moments ago. This was not the hallway she'd walked down when she came out of the bathroom. It couldn't be. Could it? A different set of sounds came to Francine's ears. "This is the place," said a voice behind the door. "Are you sure?" said another. "Yeah," said the first voice. "This was the address on the website. You ready?" "As I'll ever be." A loud bang sent Francine flying from where she sat. She scrambled to her feet, but could do nothing else as fear gripped her yet again. She stared at the front door. There came another bang, and the door sailed open, smacking loudly into the wall. There stood 2 young men, dressed in black. As they moved toward her, she saw that they wore backpacks that looked uncomfortably full. They carried flashlights, and each held a strange device she'd never seen before. Just like the men she'd seen in the kitchen, these boys seemed completely unaware of her presence, but this did nothing to calm Francine. Finding her feet beneath her, Francine turned and ran into the closest room, the bathroom. This room, too, had completely deteriorated since she had last been in it, filled now with the same trash and graffiti as the hallway. There was no time to wonder about it now, Francine told herself. She had to hide. She pulled back a corner of the tattered shower curtain. Below, the tub was filled with a murky, foul-smelling liquid that might have once been water. The thought of letting the water touch her nearly made her retch, but as the young men's footsteps approached, she realized she had little choice. As quietly as she could, she stepped into the tub and closed the curtain behind her. The tub itself was slippery. Francine felt a thick slime squishing beneath her feet and between her toes. She wanted to cry out in disgust, but held it in as best she could. It was then that the men stopped outside the room. "This must be the bathroom," said one. "Is this where—" "Yeah. Back in the 80s, some lady went crazy and drowned her daughter in the bathtub before slitting her wrist in the kitchen. I've seen the crime scene photos. They're pretty sick." The words pounded in her ears. What were they talking about? Could they mean... No! Her mother would never... Suddenly, the most unwanted memory flashed before her. Her mother crying, hands on her neck, the sound of splashing, fighting to breathe. Francine could contain herself no longer. She let a sob escape her lips. "Did you hear that?" one man asked the other. "Dude," said the other man, "tell me you're rolling. If we can catch a ghost on video..." Francine had stopped listening. She no longer felt afraid. She no longer felt anything. Not even pain. Numbness of every sense overtook her as every muscle in her body suddenly ceased to cooperate. She fell against the wall and slid down into the dark liquid, putting up no fight whatsoever as it washed over her, covering her nose, her mouth, her eyes. Before long, all was black and silent. Francine gripped the sides of the tub as best she could and pulled herself up into a sitting position. She spat and sputtered as the water splashed down all around her. Giggling, she swiped her dripping hair away from her eyes and gave them a rub. Dunking her head under the water had always been her favorite part of bath time.